Hi everyone, so thank you so much for joining today. So today is slightly different and we will be talking with co-curators. So I'm Amanda Lynch and joined by my lovely co-curator. And today we'll just be talking a little bit about the Prism project and how we started. So Luminara, do you want to give yourself a little bit of an intro?
Yeah, so I'm Luminara Florescu and I'm one of the co-creators, and the project started really well. It came out of in 2019 I did the B-Wing project in B-Wing in Shepton Mallet Prison, and that was Arts Council funded, and I wanted to carry on doing more projects at the prison because it was such a unique space and there was lots of interest in it.
Yeah.
So obviously we haven't been able to do any exhibitions, so it all went on hold for a while, but as soon as the prison opened up again, I kind of got in contact with them, and they were really keen on doing something this year, and then of course I invited you on, Amanda, because I was really liking what you were doing, the restrictions project, and you're a local artist as well, so yeah, Somerset-based artist, and yeah, and it kind of developed from there. We had lots of conversation, didn't we, of how it would work, how many artists we would invite in, and this time the prison suggested we use C-Wing, which was great because I think that then we knew that it was the former women's wing, and that kind of helped, I think, get a theme for the project as well, so looking into the women's history at the prison. So yeah, and it's kind of just organically started growing from there, hasn't it, really?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been a really lovely process. Obviously, I met you in 2019 at B-Wing, and that's how our friendship started, really. So obviously we met there and I visited your exhibition, and then I held Restriction in 2020 and 2021, sorry. And wrong year. And you took part in that show, and then from there we've joined together and sort of joined forces for the Prison Residencies project. So could you just tell us a little bit about your individual arts practice and how that manifested into working with being at the prison?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You kind of have a sense of what you might do, and then you get there, and then the whole environment sort of influences you and how you respond to that. And I know I wanted to do something with I called it Data Hub, and I know I wanted to do something about collecting data, and I was interested how the prison works and the sort of hyper organization of it all, and also wanting to engage the public in some way so they could get involved in the artwork of people who visited. So I started off looking at I was quite interested then at the prison officers, and looking at the Victorian prison officers, the women that were there, fascinated then by their costume, particularly their keys, and then thinking about how keys were so important, obviously, in the prison, obviously, and it gave a sense of status, and there's all kind of thing, where it's like key to freedom and things like that. And speaking then to some former prison officers that had modern day ones that had been working, for some of them working for like 30 years in prison service, and just kind of getting a sense of their experience of almost being like the carers, and their day-to-day routine. So that sort of started to become really interesting to me. And then, of course, as you know, I ended up taking on the persona of Emily Gassel, who is the only Victorian prison officer that our history guru Dave Cable helps sort of give that information, and is the only one he said that it can find at the moment. And I kind of took on this persona, and I think that came out of also this feeling of being there on site and having this responsibility for the artists that were there and for the project, and making sure the visitors, when they came in, knew what was happening and being the first person they greeted. And yeah, so I think I took that, it felt like quite, again, a very organic and natural development in the work. Like I think it was more of a responding to actually being there. And then, out of that as well was it was wonderful having the visitors write their, on the key tags of these 50 keys, these old keys that I managed to get hold of, a number that was special to them. And of course, because in prison you've got cell numbers and prisoner numbers. So again, all that organization. And they were writing a number that was special to them on the tags and putting them into the letterpress, which has a nice echo from your restriction exhibition, which I think they really enjoyed that, taking part of that, and then writing on the index cards that I gave them what that number meant to them and putting it on my pin board. And I was just really overwhelmed by the enthusiasm for it, and also people sharing really personal stories of why the number was special to them. Yeah. So yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because both of us had quite set ideas in our own practice when we initially started. So I was quite keen to look into like the postal movement within the prison and how that worked. And that slowly changed into looking purely at the women and how different things affected them throughout their time being in the prison. So, making collages, mainly looking at the loss of their identity, because they had very, very, obscure details, written about these women. So it'd have their height and their hair color and possibly eye color, but it may say they had a cut on their hand or they had a large nose. It's really strange the way they picked out these key features,
Yeah.
And so from that, as you know, obviously I developed these collages, but that changed, didn't it, from our sort of original talk, and so did your work. So obviously we both were looking at the data in quite different ways, and that was what we were interested in. They both slowly progressed into things totally unexpected, and from that, obviously we sort of came back together because we were quite keen, weren't we, to work together on this project, and formed some information on QR codes. So I was working entirely remotely, and obviously you were physically on site. Do you want to just say a little bit about how the QR codes came to be at the Prism?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting project in that way, wasn't it? Of communicating with each other remotely, and that I thought that was a really nice part of it. And this idea that we through WhatsApp, that you were sending me a QR code every couple of days, and I didn't know what was going to be on the QR codes, and it was, I mean, I didn't get to do all of them, so it's actually quite a nice thing to do. I was thinking as sort of a legacy beyond the 16 days, to still look at that, look at those QR, and I've forgotten what's on them as well, but it's really nice to scan them and see what was there, and then I put them up on the wall and told visitors about them when they came in, because they did spot them. I mean, they're only tiny QR codes, aren't they? But people were curious, like what are those codes, and they were using their phones to kind of see where they linked. So that was really nice, and I've actually left one on the cell wall. Ooh. And I thought it was really nice because we cleared everything out. And I said to a couple of artists there, I said, I'm going to leave one QR code on there, which I think actually links to our website, and just have this random QR code. So it might be quite interesting for people to, when they scan it and, find out about the project sort of accidentally.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a really nice way of working. And that kind of element of, so there's an element of kind of, this idea of working with the data. And I think this you brought this into your collages as well, didn't you? That there's the known data or history, and there's also the kind of honouring the unknown. So I think you put some of into your work as well, your collages, things that might not have been, might have been sort of made up, part of the history, or guessing what is kind of carrying on from those women's stories. And that's what I liked about the QR codes things as well, is that you didn't know what was going to come. And also you also, the instructions was to, you sent them to me, I didn't know what I was going to receive, and then you didn't know what I was going to do with them. So yeah, it was, I think that was really good fun actually.
Yeah, because we both realised that we were looking at similar patterns throughout the history, and obviously a lot of questions were being asked from obviously other artists and visitors about the history side of the women's wing. And as you know, we both started looking online into different parts of the history, and some of it you just didn't know whether that was true or if it was false history. And so I picked up on that, and yes, in my collages, a lot of the main features about the women I've made up completely, because there's no history to go on at all about appearances other than some key sort of telling details to identify people. And I found that really interesting, so I moved that into the QR codes and looked for some data that was real, so things around the exercise yard and sort of day-to-day things, and then some websites that were completely fandom, you know, so that people that were into you know, fictional stories about people. Some had, there's a couple of links to those, just a written story, but yeah, totally I mean, it could be true, we just don't know that. You know, we have to assume that it's not, but yeah, we just don't know, because there just isn't enough there, especially around the women's history. And I think for us especially, that was something really pivotal to bring up for this project, is that at the prison, and a lot of, you know, history in general, there was a lot around the male inmates and things, prisoners at the prison, but there wasn't really much at all to go on, was there, for the women? And this project, we were really trying to highlight that and just bring sort of women's history to the forefront, especially using you know, 13 artists, including us in this project, and you know, working with all women, all looking at women's history. It's been really fascinating what's been brought up, really. And and for you, has there been any sort of highlights on your research that you found so far?
Well, I think that well, what I think was interesting about the work that we did, and it goes to show what you were saying about women's history not really being very prevalent and really hard to find out, is that things like some visitors who, like a particular local historian, came in, and they looked around, and they you know, I know them, and they looked around, and they came back, and they were like, I'm so overwhelmed, because there's things here that I'm learning here myself as well. There's things that I didn't know, and you know, I've lived in the area for all these years, and I've done all this research, and they've done a lot of research on Shepton Prison, and yes, there's that women's history. So I think that, yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. So those little things like that feel quite important. And yeah, nobody had, I know a lot of people, a lot of the artists were focusing on the prisoners, the female prisoners there. And, you know, a lot of the visitors were talking about those as well. So it was quite interesting when people came into my cell and they saw the female officers, and I could tell them a little bit about that, so because of the story. So that was interesting to be looking from that side. I didn't think I was going to do that, but yeah, so it ended up being quite yeah, quite a surprise for myself to go down that route and find that interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, as you mentioned, you did take on the persona of Emily.
Yeah.
And can you just say a little bit more detail about how that came to be? Because we had a conversation, didn't we, about how you found, obviously you were on site, so you were checking in with the artists that were also on site, and that became part of your own daily routine. And then Emily was kind of born, I guess, born again, should I say?
Born again. Yeah, I mean, I hope in a way that, I mean, there's such little again to know about her. Yeah. There's no photographs of her. Apparently there's a photograph of a present that she was given, right, that relatives had sent to Dave, and but apart from that there was very little. So I had to kind of imagine, you know, her and what it would be like, and I hope I did that in a sort of way that honors her a bit. And oh, and of course then there's the ghost story about Emily. That's where, yes, actually that's where that comes from, doesn't it, really? So, you know, Dave Cable again saying that he had gone, he does his research, doesn't he, in prison as well, about looking into the paranormal and trying to understand, because there's lots of paranormal sort of sightings by people in the prison, and they have a lot of ghost hunting going on. So I think Dave's approaching it from a very scientific point of view, and trying to understand why that happens, if it's something from our mind's energy, memory. So it's very interesting, that part of his work. And he'd actually, you know, told me a story that he'd been in C Wing in one of the cells overnight. I think it was a couple of weeks before we started the Prison Residencies, and that he had been sort of asking, you know, if anybody would like to say anything, and anything's happening. And then he heard a very gentle 4 knocks on the cell door, and he'd had the door shut, and he thought it might be just ghost hunters or other overnight stayers.
Yeah.
But then I think through his machines, or a pendulum I think was using, it actually said it was Emily.
Yeah.
And that she had come in to check, do her rounds and check that he was okay. And apparently she didn't like her job. So right. That's what she found out. I don't know why she didn't like her job. So I was quite moved by that story, but that again, that care, and I think that comes up a lot in my work anyway, that sort of caretaking. So I was like, yeah, I said to him that that's really touched me, my heart, really, that idea of her spirit, or her echo, or whatever you want, is still sort of wandering the wing and knocking on the door and checking it that visitors are okay, you know. And so, yeah, as you said, then I didn't think that I would take on, at that time, I didn't think that I would take on her persona, but it just kind of organically, as I was there, and people, some of the artists were saying, you do realize that you're starting to stand. Yeah. because if you look at the images that I got of other female prison officers from around the UK, just a few photographs, they are standing, as they're obviously having their official photographs taken, they're standing with their hands on their, one hand resting on their keys, which obviously is, you know, some kind of sign of some kind of status, you know, of what their role is, and things like that. And so I didn't, and then I was putting some of the visitors' keys that had labelled. I put a big bunch on around my waist as well, to kind of finish off the uniform. Found myself, you know, those keys got quite warm sometimes. So I realised that I was keeping my hand on them, almost taking care again of people's memories. But you do, you know, you kind of, and I was getting more and more tidy and smart as the days went on. So in the end, I was like, oh, you know, asking like my daughter, who's done ballet and things, like, can you do me a proper hair bun? So my hair is really tidy, because I feel like if I'm going to do this, take on this persona, then I need to kind of really fully embody it. So to sort of honor them best way I can. So yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah,
and it went down brilliantly with artists and visitors alike, you know, and yeah, you really did do a great homage to her, which was brilliant. And obviously you were on site for the 16 days, so how was your overall experience of being back in the prison, obviously in a different wing, which was a different experience to B wing?
Yeah, well, it is a very different a feel to that wing than B wing, because it's slightly smaller, and I think it's kind of got more light, because it's slightly higher up. It's not sort of in the center like B wing was up there. So it had a sort of it's a funny thing to say, but it had a slightly sweeter energy about it.
Yeah.
A few people who came in who'd been to B Wing and then came to see us in C Wing said the same thing, and said they really, that there's a real difference to that. So yeah, but I mean, there's still an adjustment to make. You go in, and the first couple of days that you adjust to that environment and the harshness of that. But what is interesting, I suppose, because of doing the B Wing, and I kind of went through a process there of working through the sort of shock. It was quicker. It was a quicker process, and I realized that what I had to be aware of is that the artists, some of the artists, and some of the visitors as well, were still going through that process and still having to adjust. And even some of the visitors, like I said, they were coming in, and they really enjoyed the artwork, but they said they found it hard to be there because of the environment. And they were just like, oh, it's so overwhelmed. And I realized I wasn't in that place anymore. I wasn't in that place of that shock. And some people, felt it was like horror, like it's very disturbing. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, well, thank you for reminding me that is people's experience when they come in, for some people anyway, because I think I desensitized from it a bit. So yeah, it was good to be reminded of that.
Definitely. And so obviously I worked entirely remotely for this project, and I've had quite a few people ask me, did I feel like I was missing out from the experience? And obviously, as you've just described, there was a lot of emotion attached to being physically there. And I really did feel like I had the best of both worlds, because I was really able to see every day the artist's progression, because we were doing things for the website and things like that. And obviously we had daily conversations as well, so we were very much in each other's worlds. But I totally didn't feel like I was missing out on the actual experience. I did feel very much part of it. And I think being separate from it, I could really focus down onto just the information and not have, being physically there, I think would have really impacted my final work. So I think having that separation actually really helped me in this instance. And it was great, because I was seeing kind of what the public was seeing, the daily uptake of what the artists were doing, how things rapidly changed from the beginning of the project to the end. And just seeing that growth has been, a real privilege, really. So that's something that was really interesting between us, wasn't it? You were very much in it, and you were so aware that, you were very much there and absorbed, and I could kind of see things changing, and we had quite in-depth conversations about that throughout the project. So thank you for that, for letting me sort of join in on this way.
Yeah.
So obviously your work, it really did change for the course of the 2 weeks. And where do you see your work going for this project? Is this something you'd like to continue, or is there elements of it you want to carry on with? Where's your thoughts on the making side rather than the curator?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? As an artist and curator, and we've talked about that. How do you marry the two, together, and then the work that comes out of that as well. And I think at the moment I'm realizing that I need it to rest for a while, because as you were saying, it's quite an interesting perspective that you were looking in on it, and it was because it was really nice. I did feel the remote artists were there, their presence there. I mean, that's the joy of sort of social media, isn't it? Yeah. You can keep in touch, and it does feel really very live and very current. And having the remote artists, their work in there, and showing people around their cells. So there was a real sense of, everybody there. And obviously you and I spoke almost every day, didn't we? Yeah. So that was really great. And and I kind of in a way quite envy where you were, because it was like, I know that I just at times just felt it was very intense being on site for all that time, and holding those two different roles of trying to being a contributing artist, at the same time being the curator, and you're responsible for people and communicating with the Prism team, and all that kind of things. And so yeah, that was quite an interesting thing. So I think at the moment it's about, I'm just going to let because we're still wrapping up the project, aren't we? People are saying, oh, how are we doing at the project? So it's not quite finished yet. It's still wrapping up. So I think we have to sort of, I feel of like giving that time to sort of wrap it up and do the curator bit, and then there'll be time to look at the work. And there is talk about possibly some of the work being installed in the prison for a few months now as like a legacy of it. But yeah, I'm looking at elements and how I might like to present what I've done, take it further. I think there's quite a few collaborations. I'd like to continue collaborating with you on things. I think we've got quite similar themes going on and ways of working. Of course, the dog's got to get in. And yeah, I think that's happening with some of the artists, isn't it? They're continuing collaboration. So I think I'm really happy to continue with the work in the same kind of way that we did the work for the 16 days, where allow it to organically develop and see what comes of it. Yeah. And what about yourself? How are you?
Yeah, definitely, and it feels exactly the same. You need to like decompress, because it was a very, very intense 16 days. There was a lot going on, from not just the making perspective from the artist, but also the research side of it. Some of it was quite heavy to work with, and yeah, that's also a bit of a minefield, because you find this one person's name, you have to try and like track them through time, as it were. That side of it I'm quite interested in, still sort of seeing through, especially around the notion of there's snippets of people. So there may be, you'll have a name, and obviously their crime and time of what they've done and what have you, but there won't be anything else around that person. So how you envision that person is totally made up. That's something I think is quite interesting, especially around the notion of transportation. So people being deemed undesirable enough to be shipped off to another country to see out their prison sentence. Those sorts of areas I'm quite keen to sort of look more into from a research perspective. And yeah, it's been really nice seeing how many of the artists have collaborated with one another. And I think, we've spoken before, and with the other artists, that seems to be an ongoing thing, that this project just, obviously it wasn't intense 16 days, but it hasn't just ended. And I think that's such a lovely legacy of this, is that it's not just going to end, it is going to continue in many different ways. So I'm quite excited to see how all the other artists produce new work and what comes out of that, as well as our own, because I very much feel that you're right in what you say, our interest threads very much cross over, but we just execute them in very different ways, which is great. But we can have really in-depth conversation on subject matter and then go off and do our own things and come back again. That's been fantastic. So again, yeah, it's been really exciting, because it's a totally new way of working. I think that's something we noticed, wasn't it, is that as artists we're very much on our own and get on with your own thing. But a project like this, obviously, as a group residency, that there's a group of women working on their own projects, but obviously for some things together. And that's another way of working that I think a lot of artists haven't had the opportunity to do. So again, like us, hopefully something that can continue in the future. Yeah, which again has been really, really great. So what's next for you then? What's next for your project after you've had a nice, lovely rest?
Yeah, what's next for me? Well, I got some more projects coming up, and they're it's very sort of social practice based. There's this thing of, will we be able to do them face to face? But that's fine. Things can work on Zoom, as we know. So yeah, and I think for me, looking looking more deeply into that, kind of involving the collaboration with the public and other artists. That's kind of my passion, really. And working, I really, I also really, I think this project showed how it is possible to work remotely as well.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this, haven't we? That we like the sort of mail art work that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Because you're doing the correspondence collective, and yeah, I think that that's a really interesting way of working. And so bringing all those sort of threads together, and with next projects that I'm doing through my own arts organisation, Hearthstone Ways, is we'll be working half-half. So some of it on Zoom, some of it in person, some through the post. So I think it's quite exciting to work in that way. Yeah.
I think.
You've got some developments, haven't you? You've got things happening.
Yeah, so I've been really lucky to do as an artist, or the next one is do a residency program in November based on politics and collage. So that's going to be really fascinating. Again, it's looking at history as well, and I definitely feel that I think it's one of those things you don't realise until a few things happen, like the common thread. I thought, oh, actually, history's come up a few times now. That's obviously very much part of the work. So looking at the historical side of mail art, how that affects or could be present today, and things like that, has all been like there's a little thread sewing its way through.
Yeah.
Which has been great. And yes, obviously still doing work for Correspondence Collective. And I'll be giving an artist talk on the 6th of November around the Correspondence Collective. So that would be great. So yeah, some exciting projects as an artist that's coming up. And I think, as we've said before, how did you, for yourself, Luminara, how did you find the balance between being a curator and as an artist? Because I know for myself, I've actually learned I need to treat them as two separate things, because it's really difficult for me to juggle. And that's purely because I get into it. I get really involved in, the creator's role, fully immerse myself, and I do that same with, I'm doing like an arts-based project. So how did you find that, and how do you think the balance for that is now, being a curator, artist, or do you feel you can merge the two?
I think for my own sanity, I'm hoping to develop, I'm sort of working on developing another project called Contracts of Care. And I think part of that as well is you have to be honest with yourself, and you may be capable of doing all these different things and taking on all these different roles. You might be capable of it, you may be able to, you might be good at it, I think we both proved that we can do it. But I think that there is, I feel the same as you. I think that it was physically exhausting and mentally exhausting. And actually, looking back over the residency, I really loved doing the work, but I actually know that the truth of it is that it was enough being the curator and being available. For you were looking after a lot of the remote artists, and I was looking after ones on site, and just being available is enough, for that, enough actually for a role to do. And then of course all the you're doing all the organisation as well, organisation bits, loads of admin, aren't we? And it's a huge project. I mean, I had that mad idea, I still might do that, of talking me and my data, my love of data, is just
especially with lists.
lists. Seeing if I can look back through our lists and our emails and actually try to put together a task list of what we did, and this idea that it would be probably covering a couple of walls, and just filling my studio with that, and kind of just really in a way to visualize, sort of get it out there, off out of your computers and your notebooks and things, and go, look, this is what you need to do when you do an arts project. And kind of just bringing that to the forefront, really, and bringing that out. So I think we've talked about this, that I in the future I'm going to, if I do a project, then I think I will stick with that curating role, and separate the artist and curator. Is that how you're feeling, do you think, going forward?
Yeah, I think so. Just because, as you say, we were very organized, being new. I mean, we, going into this project, we knew exactly where we both were. Obviously, we divvied up our tasks really well, and we were on it. In an organizational point, I would say we were very good.
Yeah.
And then as the project went on, we still worked really well like that, where we both we had our own jobs, and some things we came together on, and that worked really, really well. But then, there's some hiccups. It just throws a spanner in the works, doesn't it? When something happens unexpected, it's the time that I think is something we've spoken about this before, and it's just the sheer volume of time that goes into different things. And again, because I was working remotely, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, lots of keys tapping and all that sort of stuff. And obviously you had things on site which, again, behind the scenes, even though you're physically there's a lot of physical organising as well as sort of digital organising. And I think you're right. I think it'd be really fascinating to see how much stuff it takes, because we've had numerous calls and WhatsApp, Zooms, emails, all that stuff to form 16 days, which when you look at it, it's quite a short period of time. And then we were talking about this the other day, weren't we? Actually, it's like, this is a 6 to 8 month project all in. You think, gosh, that's a hefty period of time of stuff to sort of digest. So I'd be really interested and also fascinated at looking at lists, because I think we all do it, don't we? We all write stuff in books and things, notepads and memos here and there, and it just gets lost in the abyss of what we're doing.
And I think it's useful when you're going for your next project, to have something and say, okay, so this is what needs to be done, rather than sort of starting from square one again. And also the reality of it, you can see the reality and say, can I take this on, and am I going to do this bit and that bit, and because really, I mean, when you think of it, it kind of first started, the idea for the project, like the very seeds of the idea were a year ago now. So we're in October now, it's October 2020. When sort of reaching out and deciding, what it was going to look like, if it could happen, negotiating with the prison. So it's like a year's work for 16 days. So, and
it's been a fantastic experience, both for being curator and artist, and also being able to see everyone else grow in their own practice. So it's been a really privileged experience. I do massively thank you for that, because it's been a pleasure working with you and on this project. It's been extremely fascinating. And so I guess to round off then is, what's your highlights from the project?
Oh, highlights. Yeah, when people ask that question, it's quite
it is a difficult one, isn't it?
It's quite a difficult one. Highlight. Well, actually, today I was sort of walking the dog today, and I think I'll select one as an example, something that because it's obviously staying with me. And it's this couple that came in, this young couple, and they must have been in like their mid-20s. And they weren't your average sort of art gallery goers or your Somerset Art Weeks visitors. They weren't, because they'd come for to look around the prison, and they stumbled upon us by accident. But wow, they were just so fascinated, and they were genuinely interested, and a few of the artists remember them. And you think how many visitors we've had, hundreds. But it's interesting how some will really stick in your memory. And I thought it was interesting when we were talking to the artists that this couple also stayed in a few of their memories, because they were just so amazed by it, and they had so much time to talk. They they were asking a lot of questions, and they were really fascinated, and generally they had never seen anything like it. But their minds were so open. And I think that for me, and then there was another family as well. And for me, I think that is certainly one of the highlights, that you are, with this project, we're reaching people that wouldn't normally go to galleries or see that kind of work. And what's lovely is they don't mock it or, you know, anything. They are, you know, generally wanting to talk to you and tell and share their story with you. And yeah, it's I think that's really something really unique that the residencies in the prison give, that you wouldn't get in a gallery.
Yeah, definitely. And
yeah.
You're right in what you've said. A lot of the other artists have picked up on that couple, and that's been really nice that everyone's got like a shared experience. So I suppose for me, one of my highlights was probably we were on the radio. That was great, and just the press coverage we got, I think, was one of my highlights, because it's a bit surreal when you see your projects on the telly. It is a bit weird, but it really felt validated that this was a newsworthy project, because I mean there's thousands of stories each day, isn't there, now that get aired, and things, that everything happens every second of every day, especially with like social media and turnover. And yeah, just seeing, you know, all the efforts we had gone into to make this project happen, to be on the telly, was just amazing. That was it was.
I mean, I was very camera shy. I mean, it's really like nerve-wracking, you know, having a camera in your face. But I think the piece that I talk about with people, I don't know how you felt about it, but is the piece that's on BBC Online.
Yeah.
There's that I've forgotten her name, but the reporter came down, and I think it was a Sunday, and she was just so lovely and calm, and nothing was rushed, and you forgot she was there, and she was just going in and out the cells and spending a lot of time with each artist. And I just felt the piece that she wrote was really beautiful, really sensitive to, you could tell that she had really listened and spent the time there. So I think that's a really nice piece that we can be proud of.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was just this notion of like, wow, it's just got on the telly, and it's this feeling of validation that, you know, all this hard work we've put into it, that it was newsworthy and it was deemed important enough to be so. I mean, that, I think, for looking at historically, I think that's a big, you know, it's a massive achievement for us. And I was very proud. I suppose that's what it was. It's that feeling of achievement. Lovely.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and also just working with the artists generally, especially seeing like you having that really privileged place of where you could just see their daily progression. I mean, that was also a massive highlight. But yeah, though, I guess to summarize, there's those two. But yeah, seeing how people, obviously we knew their initial ideas and how they changed and merged and overlapped into their final outcome. Yeah, was great to see, because I could see the little changes happening each day, and which a lot of the artists, when I've spoken to them, or we've spoken to them, hadn't realised and sort of till the end when they evaluated their projects. So yeah, again, that was really great to see that as well. So
and the two and there was two stories running throughout it, wasn't there? There was the story of the artwork that was going on and being made, and that was one story, and the history and the story of the female prisoners and things. And then there was actually the story of the artists there, and how their lives were being affected, and how they were bonding and supporting each other. And it was a really lovely environment to working in that way. It was a really nice group to working, and because it was very harsh conditions, and as you've said as well, the subject matter and the history for all the artists was quite heavy. So I think you do need a kind of emotional support for that as well. And I think everybody did really well on that, and everybody had a lot of compassion for each other. So I think that made it quite a special project.
Yeah. Well, here's to the future.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, I just want to massively thank you again for inviting me on this project to work with you. And yeah, let's keep at it. And I wish you all the best for your future projects, because they're soon upon us, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And just a huge thank you again. And thanks for your time for this today. So
yeah, well, thank you for accepting and coming on board. And yeah, it's been a pleasure working with you. And yeah, and good luck on your residency.
Thank you. Thanks again, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, okay, bye-bye.